Now, the first one we're going to go over is the Flame Ran. The first ability is the damage ability that will take down the gate. That is going to be your main hit. However, you are going to want to hit these 2 ability on cooldown. The reason is structural vulnerability. This can stack up to 10 times, and it gives 10% increased damage to the gate, which enhances your 1 skill. Now, your 3 skill is a PB AoE knockback. It knocks all the enemies down in an area, and it does a certain amount of damage to them. This is useful against Keep Lords when you want to break their break bar, but generally with a group of our size, we don't use it too much. The Iron Will is the most misunderstood ability in the game. When we are about to breach a door and there is potential fire on the other side, popping this will hit 50 targets and reduce 50% of their damage for 5 seconds. Doesn't sound like much, but it will stack with Rite of the Great Dwarf, and it is a huge damage reduction. I've seen sieges succeed because somebody used this on the breach. I will be combining the cannon and the arrow cart into one because they basically run the same thing. They are high damage to a specific area, hitting multiple targets. Now, the arrow cart has an area of hit where it will damage all enemies in that area. The number of targets is 50, so against large sieges, it is a big deal. The trick to winning the fight with an arrow cart is when an enemy gets a down. When an enemy gets a down, you are going to focus that down with all arrow carts and all cannons. The point is, when an enemy gets a down, that is where you have a potential kill, but it also means the entire group is going to stop healing, stop dodging, stop evading, and they are going to try to res that character up. 1 down can quickly turn into 2, can quickly turn into 5, can quickly turn into a Zerg wipe. So make sure you are focusing those downs when they happen. Your 2 skill is a cripple, your 3 skill is a bleed. Not terribly important. The most important thing is that you just keep firing on the area. The 4 skill is a reveal, but most of the time this isn't mattered. Again, the cannon is the same deal. The difference is it has a 3 skill is a chill, but that chill ability is, again, it is good to keep people in an area, but most of the damage is going to come from spamming your 1 on a target. Next we have the Ballista. The Ballista is a long-range, single-target hit that pierces. This is primarily used to counter enemy siege, although I have seen it used, usually unsuccessfully, to pierce long groups of enemies to try to stop a surging group. The 1 skill is your primary shot, primarily because it has a low cooldown. It does decent damage and a 3500 range. The 2 skill is an exploding shot. It has a lower trajectory and will detonate for damage to all targets. Hitting siege or players that are protected or off of the range of the 1 skill, you will usually just spam the 2 skill. Your 3 skill is specifically damaging siege equipment high. It will do about 5 times the amount of damage of the 1 skill, and it is extremely powerful for countering enemy siege. If they put a build site out and you hit them with this, the build site will instantly pop. Lastly, the 4th slot is generally used to stop enemies from gliding off of something and dropping into a tower. I've chosen this tower right here as a good indicator of when to use this. If you use a ballista in an area such as down here or against this cliff wall, or you were to use it on the other side, there is a very easy way for enemies to spawn from Citadel and glide into these towers. But if you use a ballista, you can snipe them out of the sky, it disables them, and they go falling to their death. The mechanics for the mortar, treb, and catapult for launching the attacks are the same. The 1 skill and the 3 skill will rotate the siege around. Fire by holding the 2 skill until the bar hits a certain point. When it hits that point, you fire. Now, a trick that you can do to hit the exact same point is if you put your mouse over the point that you want to hit and let it go when it hits that mouse and you leave it there, these treb or the kata or whatever you're shooting will hit the exact same point every single time. allowing you to keep hitting the same point. Now, for the mortar, the 5 skill is a very powerful AoE attack. It knocks people off of siege, and it does a decent amount of damage. Lastly, incendiary shells are probably the most underrated thing in the game. They do a ton of damage. I've seen 20 and 25 stacks of burning on targets. If you have a little bit of Condi damage on your build and you drop that on a group, you are almost ensuring some wipes. The catapult has 2 different loads. They have boulder loads, which will do damage and knock people down, and gravel loads, which do nothing, so don't use it. Stay on boulder, hold the button down, shot will fire, will knock enemies back, will hit through gates, is great damage against walls. One ability that is specific to the kata is the siege bubble. It will perform a protective bubble around, stopping projectiles. Those projectiles can also be siege disablers. So if an enemy jumps up on the wall and you're watching out for him, you can pop this, stop the disabler, and potentially save the raid. The Treb has the longest range of any siege in the game. It has 2 shots, the cow shot and the fire shot. The fire shot is your standard hit when an enemy group is sieging and you are trying to destroy that siege. Do not throw cows on enemies who are sieging. The cow is very useful for hitting enemy groups before they have sieged or while they are sieging and you are unable to actually hit them. You can hit near them with a massive AoE for the cow. This also removes 1 supply per second. It has 50 targets, which means 50 supply from a raid per second, if used correctly, is devastating to an enemy Zerg. However, just to reiterate, if an enemy Zerg is sieging, you only want to use your fire shot. The last shot is the healing oasis shot. This is not super useful and I would not recommend using it. Next up to discuss is the shield gen. For shield gens, you're going to need mastery, otherwise your abilities are not going to be able to be on cooldown and take up the area that they are going to need to do. Now your 1 skill is for lobbing a bouncing ball of force that knocks the target bound. Basically just a fancy way of saying a knockdown. So if you see the cast right here, a little ball goes out and it will knock people off of there. It's not generally used for this, nor is it used for the force wall that you will see right here that can basically stop enemies. But of course, if they have stability, they can go right through it. The primary focus of the shield gen is for enemy siege, either countering it inside of a tower or attacking. So assume this Langer right here is an enemy controlled tower. I have TSYM on the guild flame ram, and we need to prevent them from dying. If this is a worthy point, you will see tons of AC fire coming out on it. Now, when I put this bubble, it will cover the flame ram, but the shield gen will also prevent AC fire. Now, the trick to it is to having a buddy running the other shield gen. And as you will see here, when my shield goes down, the next shield gen will cover it. This prevents disablers, this prevents AC fire, this prevents anything that could potentially disrupt the siege. Now his will go down for a brief minute, and then you will see mine go right back out. And generally keep your mouse at the same point so that you can immediately cast it and you don't have that gap like I did right there. Sieges have been wiped for less. Lastly, we are going to go over the golem. The golem is designed to move from inner to outer gates, vice versa. It is also available to hit gates from a good distance away, and most important of all, it can only be disabled for 20 seconds, whereas the rest of the siege is disabled for 35. You will see right here, siege disablers, piloted golems for 20 seconds. This cuts the amount of disable in half. Now, when using one of these, your only 2 skills you are to use during a fight are going to be your 1 skill, which will do damage to the gate, and your 3 skill, which will put a bubble around you and stop disablers. The best golem drivers I've seen can basically spam this 1 over and over and over, wait till a siege disabler jumps up on the wall, and then pop their siege disabler, saving the siege. Most important with the golem is to not be inside of the gate. If you are right here, not only can the enemy burn you through the gate much easier, but a siege disable will actually hit you through the gate and disable everybody else around you. So when you are hitting a gate, you want to be at the farthest point possible. If you get no numbers, tap forward and hit it again. Tap forward again, and then boom, all of a sudden you get numbers. That's how you want to siege a gate. You are going to continue to spam 1 on cooldown and keep an eye on the walls. If your camera settings are correct, you will be able to see that siege disabler jump up on the wall and then just pop your 3 real quick and save the siege. Now, the first of the traps we will go over is the siege disabler. The siege disabler is a ability that uses 10 supply and is purchased at the traps vendor. Once you use the siege disabler, you have a ability to deploy your trick at 1200 range. You can jump up on a wall and throw it down, disabling all units in that area. And as you saw in the golem video, if you choose to, you can stand on the other side of the gate, and if they have put their siege too close, it will actually hit through the gate and disable them on the other side. A supply trap will be the next one we go over. A supply trap allows you to place a line that when an enemy walks over it, it triggers it, draining 5 supply from 50 targets. This ability is typically used like this, to block everything on a choke so that somebody will always run over. However, this is not the best use of them. If you place the trap like this, the first target will hit it, almost ensuring that the front end of an enemy group or potentially a roamer triggers it. However, I would recommend that you use it something like this. Whereas if you place it like this, a Zerg will come up unsuspecting and start throwing down siege. When his whole group or her whole group is built up right here and they go up to build siege, they will trigger the supply trap, triggering all of their group to lose 5 supplies. If you have 3 to 5 of these, you can drain all the supply from an entire raid. The last trap that I want to mention is the stealth disruptor trap. This disruptor trap is designed for characters coming through in stealth. Its uses are fairly limited. However, when you use it, it will place a line in the world that when the enemy runs over it, they are discovered. This is especially useful for areas where an enemy may want to veil in. For instance, assume we are inside of a tower that we are trying to capture, and the enemy is outside of the tower. If you place one of these at the entrance, it will reveal all of the enemies as soon as they come in, whether they are stealth or not. Aside from that, its uses are fairly limited.